The Dyatlov Pass incident. They chose the darkness outside. There are certain stories that continue haunting people not because of what is known, but because of what was never explained. The Dyatlov Pass incident became one of those stories almost immediately after the bodies were discovered. Even now, more than 60 years later, the details still feel less like a tragic accident and more like fragments of a nightmare that no one was ever able to fully piece together. In February of 1959, 9 experienced hikers entered the northern Ural Mountains during one of the harshest parts of winter. They were young, intelligent, physically trained, and familiar with dangerous expeditions. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, had already completed difficult journeys before, and the group itself consisted of people who understood cold weather survival far better than the average person ever could. This was not supposed to be a reckless adventure. It was supposed to be another successful expedition through remote Soviet wilderness. The mountains they entered, however, were the kind of place that changed completely after sunset. During the day, the endless snow-covered slopes looked beautiful in an almost unnatural way, stretching beneath pale skies, so empty that the landscape seemed frozen outside of time itself. But at night, the region became something else entirely. Wind moved constantly through the mountains, with a sound many people later described as strangely human. Snowstorms erased paths and landmarks so quickly that travelers could lose all sense of direction within minutes. Once darkness settled over the slopes, there were no lights anywhere for miles, no roads, no nearby villages, no sounds except the wind scraping across the ice and the trees bending somewhere far beyond visibility. Before disappearing, the hikers documented much of their journey with photographs and diary entries that still survive today. Looking at those images now creates an uncomfortable feeling because everyone in them appears relaxed and completely unaware of what was approaching. Some photographs show the group smiling while preparing equipment in deep snow. Others capture ordinary moments of exhaustion and humor beside their skis and backpacks. Nothing in their expressions suggests fear. Nothing hints that within days, every person visible in those photographs would be dead somewhere in the mountains around them. As the group traveled deeper into the wilderness, weather conditions gradually worsened. Snowstorms reduced visibility across the slopes. Temperatures dropped far below freezing. Violent winds swept constantly through the higher elevations. Even experienced hikers could become dangerously disoriented under conditions like these, particularly in complete darkness, where the sky and the ground blended together into a single wall of moving white. On February 1st, the hikers reached the eastern slope of a mountain known as Kholet Sayakol. The name is often translated as Mountain of the Dead. That evening, instead of descending into the shelter of the forest below, the group pitched their tent directly on the exposed slope of the mountain. Investigators later argued endlessly about why they made that decision. Some believed worsening visibility caused Dyatlov to lose the intended route. Others thought the campsite was chosen deliberately as part of a training exercise. Whatever the reason may have been, the decision left the group completely exposed to the freezing wind and isolated in total darkness high above the tree line. At some point during that night, something happened inside the tent. No one knows exactly what the hikers heard or saw, but the evidence discovered later suggests that whatever occurred was sudden enough and terrifying enough to override every survival instinct they had. When rescue teams finally reached the campsite weeks later, the scene they discovered made almost no sense. The tent was still standing beneath the snow. Inside were boots, heavy winter clothing, food supplies, cameras, and personal belongings left scattered exactly where they should have been. Nothing about the campsite suggested an organized evacuation. Instead, it looked as though the hikers had intended to leave for only a few moments before returning. Then investigators noticed the cuts in the fabric. The hikers had not exited through the entrance of the tent. They had sliced their way out from the inside. That detail remains one of the most disturbing parts of the entire case. Something inside or outside the tent had apparently terrified 9 experienced hikers enough to send them directly into a deadly snowstorm without proper clothing. The wind outside must have been violent enough to shake the walls of the tent constantly, filling the darkness with snapping fabric and blowing snow. Somewhere beyond the thin material separating them from the mountain, something changed. Maybe they heard movement. Maybe they saw something through the darkness outside. Or maybe panic spread through the tent so quickly that nobody had time to think rationally anymore. The footprints leading away from the campsite only deepened the mystery. Investigators discovered tracks descending toward a forest nearly a mile away, but the hikers did not appear to have fled in chaotic panic. The footprints suggested that they walked together in an oddly controlled manner despite the freezing conditions. Some appeared to be barefoot, others wore only socks. A few were only partially dressed, even though temperatures that night were cold enough to kill within minutes. And yet they still left. That is the detail many people cannot stop thinking about. Experienced hikers understand exactly what extreme cold does to the human body. They understand that stepping into a snowstorm at night without proper winter gear is almost certain death. For people like Dyatlov and his group to willingly abandon their only shelter means they must have believed that remaining inside the tent was somehow even more dangerous. The first bodies were discovered beneath a large cedar tree at the edge of the forest. Two hikers had apparently attempted to survive by building a small fire. Nearby branches high above the ground had been broken, and investigators concluded that at least one member of the group had climbed several meters into the tree during the night. Imagining that moment is genuinely unsettling. Somewhere in the darkness, in temperatures far below freezing, one of the hikers climbed barefoot into a tree while staring into the blackness beyond the forest. Several victims displayed injuries so severe that investigators compared them to violent car accidents. One hiker suffered catastrophic chest trauma. Another had a crushed skull. One woman was discovered missing her tongue. Yet despite the severity of these injuries, there were surprisingly few external wounds visible on the bodies themselves. As news of the incident spread throughout the Soviet Union, rumors began appearing almost immediately. Some witnesses claimed strange orange lights had moved across the sky near the mountains during the same nights the hikers disappeared. Others believed the group had accidentally encountered secret military experiments hidden somewhere within the wilderness. Over the decades, theories involving avalanches, psychological panic, infrasound, toxic exposure, and even paranormal encounters have all been proposed in attempts to explain what happened. And yet none of those theories completely answers the central question at the heart of the mystery. What could frighten 9 intelligent, experienced hikers badly enough to make them slash open their tent and walk voluntarily into a freezing mountain night without proper clothing? Because the terrifying part of the Dyatlov Pass incident is not simply that the hikers died. People die in mountains every year. The truly disturbing part is the evidence suggesting that during their final moments inside that tent, something convinced every single person there that remaining where they were was no longer an option. Perhaps there is a rational explanation hidden somewhere within the facts of the case. But if that is true, then the final moments inside that tent must have been unimaginably terrifying. Because one by one, in the middle of a frozen mountain wilderness with temperatures cold enough to stop a human heart in minutes, 9 experienced hikers made the same impossible decision. They chose the darkness outside,